Welcome to our first Masterclass Monday at 3. My name is Aaron Malkin. I am the Literary Director and Dramaturg at New York Theater Workshop, and we are so happy to have you all here. For those of you who don't know, in normal times, every Monday from September to May, we host a closed-door developmental reading to give artists an opportunity to hear plays in process. And so while we are not able to be in rooms together for the moment, we thought it would be, we didn't want to let the time slide by. So here we are on Mondays at 3 master classes, and we will have these for the next couple of months. And I'll give you a little more information about that at the end. And also there's information up on our website. And just for those of you, so everybody knows, again, we are broadcasting here on Zoom, and we are also simultaneously broadcasting live on Facebook. So we are so happy to have people joining us via both of these platforms. Today, we are fortunate to have Rachel Chavkin with us, beloved New York Theater Workshop collaborator. Rachel is a director, a writer, a dramaturg. At New York Theater Workshop, she worked on 3 Pianos with Dave Malloy, Hadestown with Anais Mitchell, and our production of Light Shining in Buckinghamshire a couple of seasons ago. She's also the artistic director of The Team, which has worked extensively all over the United States as well as the UK. And she is the winner of the 2019 Tony Award for her direction of Hadestown, among a host of other awards. Rachel, we are so happy to have you.
Thanks. You can see me? I'm here?
Yes, you're here. You're
Great.
here. Just to give folks a little bit of a rundown, we're gonna have a class probably for around an hour, and then we'll do some Q&A. In the meantime, if you have questions, there is a Q&A bar. If you're on Zoom, there's a Q&A bar that you can type questions into. And for folks who are following along, if there's a question that you agree with, rather than type your own version of it, you can upvote it and let us know that you're interested in hearing an answer to that as well. And folks on Facebook Live, you can write questions in the comments, and Uno, our wonderful marketing fellow, will get them to us here on Zoom. So I will disappear now and be back as needed. But thank you so much for being here, Rachel. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, hi everyone out there. This is my first time being in like webinar form in this way, so I hope it's gonna go great. As Aaron said, we have these ways for you to ask questions and to chuck stuff out. I'm going to talk a lot, which typically if I was teaching, I would probably ask more questions, but I'm going to talk a lot towards my camera, and hopefully I'm going to hit a bunch of the questions that you might have percolating in your brain as we go, but also there will be a 30-minute Q&A afterwards. So this whole event will be till about 4:30. with me talking up until around 4. And there's like some framing that I want to give. Aaron asked me what I wanted to call this class, and I think he proposed potentially the art of directing, and I was like, I can't talk about the art of directing, I can talk about how I direct. And my favorite thing when I used to teach directing was actually to think about text, because it's the root of how I sort of began thinking about my craft again, after having actually, as a university student, gotten totally uninterested for a period of time in plays. Just as like a little bit of background, I did undergrad at NYU, which was pretty extraordinary. And in my first month at NYU, I saw my first Wooster Group show, which was House Lights, their version of Gertrude Stein's Dr. Faustus Lights the Lights. And I did not know what I was watching, but I was like, that's what I want. And I had never seen experimental theater before, and I fell madly in love with it and with experimental dance. And so for the majority of my college time and for many years afterwards, I was like, I'm not interested in plays. Plays are boring. And that was a radically ignorant thing for me to be saying, because to be honest, I truly did know the vast majority of plays. And it was also ignorant in the sense that what I was responding to were those plays that I was seeing largely in productions, either in regional theaters or in on the off-Broadway stages. And I was fundamentally saying, I'm not interested so much in plays. All plays have couches. Plays do not have couches. I was like, I don't want to do plays with couches, or plays about largely white middle class and upper class families with problems. So that's what I was saying then. And then after graduating undergrad, I had the great fortune, which if you are ever offered the chance to teach anything, to teach art at any level, including elementary school, I would suggest taking it. And I very rarely give advice, if you know me, because I think giving advice can be presumptuous. But what I can say is, for me, teaching, after graduating, I got hired back to teach at NYU in my program at Playwrights Horizons. And first I was a TA, and then I was substitute teaching and doing mentoring of different directing projects. And then eventually I took over the second year directing classes. And it radically changed how I think about directing. I fucking loved it. And what I will say is that actually it's the root of those second year classes is kind of how I'm approaching this talk today. And those second year classes were year-long classes that were primarily focused on me, like sitting as a kind of doula besides the students while they worked on their own work. So I encourage you to like get out some toys and be staging as I talk at you. I wish I could be beside you all, working on your own shit, but here we are. So, and I'm thrilled to be here. So thank you really for joining me, because what we're going to do is look at how I personally think about text when I'm directing it. And as I said, I fell in love directing text when teaching how to direct text and how to think about that. And we're going to use sort of 3 of my favorite pieces of writing ever, 3 plays over the course of this class. I will screen share when we get into those, and I have some fantastic readers from the NYTW family who are going to help bring these plays to digital life. So that's just like my little preamble. Other things that I want to say in the preamble. I'm not going to talk. I'm happy in the Q&A to get into it, but I'm not talking about who I am when I devise work with my company. That is a whole other masterclass or chaos class, if not master. And actually my company, the team, we're streaming a documentary about our work called The Team Makes a Play, that you can find on our website and certainly in my Twitter and Instagram feeds. So if you want to like really get an immersion in devising, I encourage you to watch that, because Paulette Douglas, who's a beautiful documentary filmmaker, followed us through the entire making of one of our shows, Mission Drift. And it is brutal. I will not watch it with you because it makes me cry, but I think she did a fucking great job. Some of you may be wondering, well, are you going to talk about directing musicals versus plays in terms of thinking about text? I want to say at the outset that for me, actually, they're not so different. The distinction, which I want to draw up front, just so you can be thinking about this, is that in a musical, obviously part of the text is the libretto. And I've been thinking actually recently that I might stop doing this because it's so terribly painful for the composers that I work with, but I tend to force the cast to read the libretto prior to doing a listen through on day one of rehearsal, because I think very often we forget that the language has meaning apart from the other big text in a musical, which is the music. And which includes not just the music, i.e. the melodies that the singers are singing, and some basic, often piano underneath them. So, with Aeneas and Hadestown, actually, that was guitar. But the music is also the orchestrations. So if you are particularly hell-bent on just thinking about musicals, in your brain, I just want you to substitute every time I say the word text to like substitute a bigger picture of both the libretto, but also all the music sitting underneath it as equaling text. So that's to say, but fundamentally, I think it's going to be applicable, and I'll talk about Hadestown at times, and other musicals I've been delighted enough to work on. So the other thing that I want to say is everything that I'm saying, and part of why I was like, I can't talk about the art of directing, is because I actually think it would be criminal, maybe not prosecutorial, but really bad teaching to imply that there is a way to direct. I am only interested, and this is actually going to get me into kind of the core of the class here. I am only interested in how you personally direct, or how I'm personally directed. I'm interested in how I direct because it's all I've got to go on. So I'm really gonna just be talking about how I do shit. And you'll take that for what it's worth. It is not a gospel. It is just a single experience. And I can tell you that I have a big problem. This is something that one of my teachers in grad school always told me, is that and he said it very lovingly, I should say, very beloved teacher, Brian Kulick. But Brian often said that I had trouble sometimes seeing the forest through the trees. And maybe that's a male-female thing. I sometimes think it is. But if you know the image of the forest through the trees, right? A tree is such a beautiful thing to stare up close at that sometimes you can forget that there's like a whole fucking forest. And so, and Brian said I made the most beautiful trees, amongst the most beautiful trees he'd seen, which I think meant one beat to the next was so beautifully cared for, but like sometimes you just have to go faster. So pacing is rarely the first thing I care about. Sometimes in previews, I remember to think about pacing, but it's just not what I personally am interested in. More power to you if you care about pacing. It's probably a much better path to success. A lot of critics have yelled at me for that. So just to say, one of the things I'm going to talk a lot about is that directorial style, which I think is one of the hardest things to talk about. I think all that style is just taste. We'll get back to that. But so what I'm telling you is that's my taste, is I really love slowness and I love a tree. Maybe this is why I'm good at musicals, is because the forest tends to be taken care of because a composer sets time in a way that a play, and I find plays to be much, much harder than directing musicals because of this. A play, you can take as much time as you want. And in fact, we're gonna look at a play by the beautiful Carol Churchill called Light Shining in Buckinghamshire. Aaron mentioned this as one of the plays that I directed at New York Theater Workshop in 2017. And you will see Carol's text tells you almost nothing about what is happening from one spoken line of dialogue to the next to the next. And while working on that play and including prep for that play, I became very interested in what is happening between those lines. So we'll talk more about that. The other texts that we're going to look at are Young Jean Lee's Lear, which is, I find to be one of the most devastating plays I've ever encountered. I was lucky enough to see the original production downtown. And then Jenny Schwartz's play God's Ear, which equally, Annie Kaufman's production of Jenny's play remains one of my most palpable, visceral experiences in the theater. And I'll talk more before we go into the readings of them about what is going on, so that you can picture that, because that will be helpful. Great. I'm looking over, my notes are over here if you see me looking this way. Last thing I just want to say is my hope is to just be as practical as possible, which is part of why I'm just talking about myself, is I want to, as best as possible. I know when I was an early career director, a lot of things felt really abstract to me, including, and this is going to be the opening, which I'm going into now. When I was a young director, and a young actor as well, which I acted all through college. I stopped acting immediately after graduating college. I kept hearing the phrase while I was in school, make a choice. Like everyone was talking about choices, and you got to make a choice. And I was like, yeah, make a choice. What does that mean? So that's where we're going to start. Maybe everyone teaches out of their own weaknesses. So this was my weakness. We'll enter this question of what a choice is via a back door. And I know I told you that you cannot tell someone how to direct. And I totally think that that is true. What I am going to do is read you 4 things that I think are just maybe always the case, whether people are cognizant of this or not. And please, any playwrights out there, any actors out there, I'm going to come back to you, designers, all my collaborators. I'm going to come back to you. I promise I'm going to admit that you exist and are my favorite humans at the end of this hour. But for right now, I'm going to deny your existence beyond writers having produced a text that we call a play or a musical, libretto. And I'm going to say the text, i.e. the play script, I personally think, this is number 1, does not mean anything until you, the director, decide what it means. That's number 1. The text doesn't mean anything until you decide what it means. Now, obviously, as I said, keep in mind the old axiom, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I'm a director. I'm for the purposes of this class, everything's going to look like the director's job. Secret, obviously, is that actors, you can equally decide that the play means nothing until you as the actor decide what it means. And I'm sure every writer out there is screaming, I fucking decided what it means when I wrote it. That's all good. We're saying the director. Number 2, rule, always is the case. Number 2, the more choices you make equals the more specific the work becomes. I'm going to say that again. The more choices you make equals the more specific the work becomes. Number 3, every single choice you make, and again, I'm going to talk about what choices are in a moment. Every single choice you make is going to lead immediately to at least 5 more choices that could be made. So let me pause and give an example. Let's say the first choice you made is you wanted to direct Young Jean's Lear. That's a choice. The next choice you make, let's say every choice with this idea of the choices branching, let's say we've decided to set Young Jean's Lear that we just wanted to have a floor. Okay, that's a big choice. What color is that floor? Is that floor wood? Do the actors make sound when they walk on that floor? Is the floor 8 by 8? Is the floor 10 by 10? Does the floor go all the way to the edges of the theater? That's 4 branches. Maybe the last choice is, does the floor stay the entire time, or does the floor go away at some point? I'm just making shit up, but to illustrate this idea that once you make a single choice, it immediately branches out into a ton of other choices. That rule number 3 has the corollary. This is like 3A. You cannot, as a director, make a better choice until you make a choice. And the reason I say that is the number one thing that my students, when I was teaching, struggled with was just to begin making choices. And they might be overwhelmed by the multitude of choices that they could make. They might be struggling with the text analysis, so they couldn't even see what choices there were to make. So that's a lot of what we're going to be doing today. But fundamentally, you cannot make a better choice until you make a choice. And personally, I will say, I know now enough about myself to know that I have to stage a scene probably 2 to 4 times over the course of working on it before I like it, before it is like here, hitting here in my sternum or in my gut. And again, I mean that literally. Like when I am watching a play in rehearsal or a musical in rehearsal, I'm just like sitting with, oh, sorry, that was me spreading my legs. I'm sitting with my legs spread, with like my chest forward, with my eyes, often with my jaw hanging open, because I am just trying to feel whether something is working or not. Because fundamentally my taste is, what I am pursuing is to make something as visceral, or another way to think about this is as emotional as possible. So that basic goal governs every single one of my choices. And again, every director is going to have their own whatever they're in pursuit of. The last rule, back to our rules, our 4 kind of truisms. Number 4, time equals the number of choices you get to make. So time could be the number of days or weeks you got to workshop that project. It could be the number of rehearsal hours you have. It could be whether you've been working with the playwright or composer for 5 years, or you just began working with them 6 months ago. It might be your tech time. It might be your number of previews. But fundamentally, time equals the number of choices you get to make. So I hope those are clear. The text doesn't mean anything until you decide what it means. The more choices you make stemming from the text equals the more specific the work becomes. Every choice leads to 5 more. 3A being you can't make a better choice until you make a choice. And 4, time equals the number of choices you will get to make. So specific, back to that number 2, the more choices you make equals the more specific the work becomes. For me, specificity is the highest goal I look for in others' work. And what is specificity? Specificity to me means only that human could have made that. And that human is obviously in the theater, that's a lie. It means that fusion of humans. So this writer mixed with this director mixed with these actors and designers only could produce that piece of work. I think about it as like, it is the most itself it can be. And it also means you had a fuckload of time to make all the choices associated with it. So in my world, actually, both Hadestown and Great Comet, 2 shows that I've gotten to spend a huge amount of time on in my life. And by the time we got to Broadway, I had directed each show. Kind of, Hadestown was re-envisioned radically 3 different times, from New York Theatre Workshop to the Citadel in Canada to London, and then slightly less substantially from London to Broadway, but still a lot of revision. Great Comet, we actually kind of did it. We were like, we got it right, kind of in the first time at Ars Nova. That said, the production changed and grew radically from Ars Nova to the tent to ART to Broadway, via the addition of Sam Pinkleton on choreography and our whole ensemble, glorious ensemble, which grew from 6 to 14 to 20 by the time we got to Broadway. So that was like a really root thing. But fundamentally, more than anything, Comet got just more specifically itself. Mimi had always envisioned this kind of modern club that felt both very old school Russian and had this contemporary nightclub element to it. And every time we got to add more gold leaf and more, Bradley could add more intricacy to how the lighting fired and functioned, it just became more itself. So it was, I would say we had made almost all the choices by the time we got to Broadway, hence specific. Okay. Switching gears and hopefully to interrupt my voice, sonorous voice for a moment. We're going to talk now, we're going to begin looking at our first bit of text. And talk about this thing of choices. I think your primary job that you like first have to decide about in looking at a play is this question of what's happening in a given scene, in a given moment, and ultimately over the course of the play. A way that this gets talked about a lot is action. I think of action as being the actor's vocabulary, the actor's version of what is happening, which is the director's and sometimes the designer's version, but I'm just going to focus on the director. So the actor, right, is concerned with what am I as the character, what am I doing? Am I seducing? Am I pleading, etc.? All are good verbs. And I tend to think the more physical, the more like palpable, I'm getting on my knees and throwing myself at the king's feet for mercy. I think that's a much more vivid way of saying I am pleading. The same difference, right? So the actor is concerned with doing. I think the director is concerned with what's like happening in this scene. And typically there's, as with life, many, many layers of happening. We're gonna first look at God's ear. So my dear readers of Jenny Schwartz's God's Ear, will you appear? And I am going to cross your fingers. I'm going to do my first share. Oh, there you are. You look wonderful. Do you want to introduce yourself, readers?
Sure. My name is Rachel Silverman, she, her. I'm the artist workshop producer at New York Theater Workshop.
Hi, everyone. I'm Declan, they, them. I am the executive fellow at New York Theater Workshop.
Fantastic. All right, so now I am going to, oh my gosh, it's there. Okay, great. And here we go. Aha, it happened. And let's see, I'm going to do that. Great. And all right, fantastic. Okay, so what I'm doing, it's obvious probably, but I'm sharing the screen so that you can both hear our wonderful readers on the side, but also follow along, because as a director, what we're talking about is just like text. And so I want you to just like see how the text looks on the page. And I'm just gonna show you, I'm going up real quick. You'll see there is no play prior to what we are gonna read. So this is the prologue of God's Year. And what we're probably going to pretty quickly find out is that Mel, you should know this. It's not like you have to like guess in a vacuum or anything, because if you were directing this play, you would have read the whole play prior to this moment. Mel is talking about her son, who ultimately we find out has died before this play takes place. And Jenny, as a writer, and I think she's one of the most exquisite writers there is, she's in this play in particular, she's going to be very concerned with language and how language begins to matter or fall apart against something as irrational as losing your child. So I think that's very helpful to know. But all we know, all the audience would know right now is we have prologue and we have the stage direction, a hospital. Okay, let's do it. Rachel and Declan, thank you.
He's in a coma. He's hooked up to a respirator. He has a pulse. He has brain damage due to lack of extensive brain damage, due to lack of his pupils are unreactive, they said. He doesn't withdraw from pain, they said. The next 24 hours are critical. Or was it crucial? Or was it critical? Or was it crucial? He's in critical condition, they said. Survival, they said. His chances of survival, they said, low. They said, the next 24 hours are crucial to his chances of survival. They said, lost. They said, his reflexes are lost. What do you mean he has a pulse? I said, of course he has a pulse. I said, they're doing all they can, they said, helping him to breathe, providing him with
Oxygen?
Fluids, electrolytes, nutrients, they said. Most children, they said, most children who do survive this extent of a near drowning, most children, they said, are unable to walk and unable to talk, and most children.
Our son isn't like most children.
That's what I told them. That's exactly what I told them. I told them our son isn't like most children. He's not, is he?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Unlikely, they said. Recovery is unlikely, they said. Poor, they said. Prognosis is poor.
Did you tell them to go to hell? I would have told them to go to hell.
I told them, take my reflexes. I told them, give him my reflexes. I told them.
They didn't say anything about miracles, did they?
Miracles? No, not that I recall.
Hope?
What about hope?
Did they happen to mention hope?
They asked us to consider organ donation. Gentle. They were gentle. With a hand on my shoulder, they were gentle. What's the definition of prognosis? Exactly. I don't know, but I don't know. I know, but I don't know.
I don't know, but I know.
I told them, take my brainstem. I told them, give him my brainstem. I told them,
I'm here.
No, but thank you. I told them, I do not deserve gentle. I told them.
Good. Oh, it's such a devastating play. Okay. All right. So I'm back. Maybe we'll look back at that text. So, okay, we're going to try our first participatory moment. And if this doesn't go well, then we will abort all participatory moments. I want to give it a swirl. And Rachel and Declan, you are welcome to hang here still. And you are also welcome, if you want, to go away. I might rope you back in. We'll see. So, okay, participatory moments. I want you, and I'll go back and share the screen because maybe it'll help. Thinking about this ridiculously dogmatic thing that I have said. The text doesn't mean anything until you decide what it means. The more choices you make equals the more specific the work becomes. Every choice you make is going to lead to a bunch more, and time equals the number of choices you get to make. Participatory is, I'd love to hear you identify some choices that might have to get made as you begin to think about this as a director. So just write in some choices that need to get made. And you can write in just, each of you, there's hundreds of you, so just one. What is a choice that needs to get made? And Aaron is going to help us sort through these. And I'm going to start sharing again while you think about this. Hopefully you see these opening lines again. Oh, great. Figured that out. Okay. So Aaron, do you have any things to share?
Yes. And just to answer the question that somebody asked, if you write them into the Q&A, that would be great. And I am reading through them there. So there's a bunch of choices to be made about the location. Where in the hospital are they? Is it a realistic hospital? There's choices to be made. What time?
Great. Let's fasten on to that one for a moment. We'll go through a few of them. Fucking love it. Great. So whoever just wrote that down, I'm gonna use this as like a wormhole to think about design. So as I start reading a play, I begin probably what most directors do is sort of thinking about how this play or musical is going to live in space. And the way that I phrase that for myself is, how does this space need to function? And that's going to have two elements. One is going to be transitions, and like literally, does the space need to change rapidly from place to place? Do we have a fuckload of locations that we're going to? I can tell you I'm working on this beautiful new musical, Lempicka, right now. And Lempicka is literally gonna go from a seedy Parisian nightclub to the streets of Paris, like to an outside block. We have to go from inside to outside. And then we have to, like, later on, suddenly reveal two gigantic towers. It's very cinematic, and it happens within like 4 bars of music. And so on a technical level, one of the first things I said to Ricardo Hernandez, our designer, is I think everything's got to roll. And because we got to move fast. So we need a couch. This is a musical that has to, right? They have home scenes, and we need a domestic space. So it's going to have a chaise or a couch of some kind. But then we also got to go very fast from the apartment to the club or wherever. So this idea of wheeling. But then secondly, which is equally in the beautiful question that came from a number of you, of what is this hospital? Where in the hospital are we? But much more so, I love the second thing that you read, Aaron, which is it a realistic hospital or not? is thinking about what does this space need spiritually, which goes back to like, what is happening in this play that I'm looking at? And so with God's ear, right, the answer in part to what is happening is we have two parents who seem to be in pretty fucking different places, right? We have this moment, I hope you can see where my mouse is. We have this moment that Ted first enters over here on the left side of my screen. Oxygen. Was Ted even there at the beginning? And he says, did you tell them to go to hell? So we can begin to go, oh God, I don't think Ted was at the hospital. So where are we? And is it real? I know I'm just repeating back the question that was asked, but I'm going to begin to go, this language is kind of realistic, but very circular. So something poetic is happening, which is going to make me guess maybe it's not exactly a realistic hospital scene. Aaron, what's another choice to that has been flagged from the sphere?
There are a number of people who are mentioning that how long have they been in the hospital? What's their emotional relationship to each other at the top of the play?
Love all this.
Let's see. What do the speakers need from the listeners?
Such a good question. What does the speakers need from the listeners? I would say more specifically, who the hell is Mel talking to? So we've got to figure out who the hell the audience is, because, well, I just made an assumption right there, which is led by my taste, because I tend to love no fourth wall in the theater, as maybe if you've seen Great Comet or you've seen Hadestown, you might guess. Very often I love knocking down that fourth wall, or just what I really mean is not pretending that a fourth wall exists. And so Mel is talking to someone. I guess she could be talking to Ted. She could be talking to the audience. Again, I go back to, is Ted on stage or not at the beginning? Because who knows? Other ones, Aaron, that you particularly love?
What happened before? When is this event in relationship to the conversation that they're having about it? What does it sound? What's the soundscape in the moment that we're listening to?
Yes, lovely. Okay, good. I'm stopping sharing. These are all fantastic questions. And what I would say that are particularly going to be the directorial questions is, how is this going to be staged? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, right, actors are very, very good at choosing a lot of these emotional questions and given circumstances, etc. And so this is kind of me going to that part where I said I would acknowledge that other collaborators exist, because I love them and they are truly my favorite humans, are my collaborators. Is there are so many fucking things to decide if you are directing a show, including, I just had a phone meeting for a project earlier today, and I had to be deciding what are my budget priorities, which obviously both has nothing and everything to do with the staging of the play. So at any given moment, the director has a ton on their plate, which is why I really love the old thing that you hear of the director directs the play, the actor directs the character. I think that's wonderful, because I can't make every choice there is to make. I can make the big choices, i.e. of world, which includes atmosphere, again, this kind of spiritual atmosphere. It includes literally the set, In Annie Kaufman's production, the set was this, like, in my memory, this blue rectangular box that ultimately what you find out is the sun fell through the ice. And so there was this terrible feeling that the parents and ultimately all the characters in the world were like skating on this frozen ice, and people popped up out of it in my memory. I saw it a few times because I loved it so much. And I could tell you the color of the blue if I saw it in a lineup, but you forget things because theater is ephemeral. But there was this like feeling of apprehension. I believe there were no set pieces in the whole thing. There were like no props. It was just this blue box upon which the actors stood. And the lighting was like painting. It was glorious. So those are those choices that were made. And they were really good ones. I want to go now to, I want to go thinking about this question of what's happening further, of like, what's going on. So God's Ear, right, we have the very literal going on of Mel is telling what happened with her son. But we have the underneath going on is, I would suggest Mel is, I might say it this way to the actress, what I think Mel is doing here is trying to find the right words to describe a situation that is beyond words and in fact even beyond sense. And if language is how we make the world make sense, right? Oh, I have a headache, or I'm having a brain aneurysm, or I'm having a migraine. Whatever starts as this incoherent pain in a skull takes shape and becomes understandable when you say, I have a headache. And then you know, oh, I can take Tylenol. So Mel is existing in a place where she has no words for what has happened, which is her son has died. And yet she has to talk about it. And so I would think in the directorial sense of what is happening, that someone is like making her tell this story. You know how parents say, use your words. Someone has said to Mel, use your words. And so she is trying to. And I would say that probably Ted, and I know I'm saying this in part because I know where the play is going, that Ted is sort of alienated from that visceral experience that Mel is happening. He has a very different experience because he is not at the hospital at this time to be receiving this, and he's not a mother. And we're going to find out that there's a very different thing that Jenny is interested in between fathers and mothers. And then even more so, what has happened to the question, what is happening? I would say the play, so that's what the characters are doing, that the play, what is happening in this moment is two parents are sort of in free fall, trying to make sense of a situation that does not make sense. And so coming back to design as being in line with what is happening, trying to manifest that in some way, and to the whoever or however many of you brilliantly wrote, is the hospital a real hospital or not? I would say this space is not a real space, would be my guess, if I was working on this play. I would say that this space is a place of grief, of memory looping back on itself. I use the image of free fall, which makes me think that it's a vacuum space. That might be because I'm thinking about Annie Kaufman's original production, where there was just the actors standing on this blue surface, surrounded by all that space, right? But I'm thinking about the viscera of that. I want to go, readers, friends, we're gonna jump the Young Jean Lee scene for a moment, and I want to go, because time, it goes by so fast, I want to go to Light Shining in Buckinghamshire. So Taylor and Rachel, will you two appear? Wonderful. Hi. So I'm going to share screen again for this. It's just it's a day of devastation, because like in the theater. So I'm going to go to Carol Churchill's Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, which is not that, which is this. Do you all see do you see Light Shining in Buckinghamshire? Okay, huzzah. And I'm going to move y'all to, oops. I'm going to move, yeah, it's happening. Oh, yes, okay, Victory Gardens. All right. Okay, so we're gonna read this very devastating scene in Act 2 of Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, which is called A Woman Leaves Her Baby. Taylor, you wanna be first, and yep. Rachel will be second?
Great.
So I'll read the stage direction. So the title is A Woman Leaves Her Baby. The stage direction, 2 women. First woman is carrying a baby.
You'll laugh.
No.
Now I'm here, I can't do it.
Waiting for that.
Don't go. Don't be angry.
We come all this way.
We go back.
Why we bother?
We go back, quick, never mind.
We come so they look after her.
I can't.
I know, but just put her down.
Too soon.
Put her down, just...
Silence.
She'd die if you keep her.
I can't.
What you do then? You got no milk? She not even crying now, see? That's not good. You ain't had one, I'm telling you, she dying.
If I drunk more water, make more milk?
Not without food, not how ill you are.
What if nobody?
They will. It's a special house. It's a good town. The mayor himself. Picture inside on the wall with his chain. Mayor himself see her all right.
Another day.
She'll be dead.
If she was bigger?
You're not doing it for you. Do it for her. Wouldn't you die to have her live happy? Won't even put her down. It's for her.
Could die. Can't put her down.
Don't talk. Do it. Do it.
If she was still inside me.
Good. That's like, sorry. We should have used the mirror scene. What was I thinking? This scene is so sad. The mirror scene is so funny and joyous. And then sad. Okay, great. So first and foremost, folkies, want to point out, right, that let's look at, Taylor and Rachel, will you read the opening 5 lines?
Yep. You'll laugh.
No.
Now I'm here, I can't do it.
Waiting for that.
Don't go. Don't be angry.
Good. Okay. So I just want to observe what the first time I read this script, I was like, what was my thought process through actually a lot of this. And this scene helped me understand that Carol Churchill was not going to help me with stage directions, because she's just not so interested in that particular thing, right? So we can begin to imagine that between line 4, waiting for that, and line 5, don't go, don't be angry. We can probably surmise that the second woman begins to move away. And so we have the question, is she giving up, resigned? Is she frustrated, etc.? But fundamentally, the second woman has to do something, right, in order for the first woman to have to say, don't go, don't be angry. And probably we know that the second woman is frustrated because of angry, right? So writers, this is where you can, wave your Valkyrie flags and go, see, I told you I had decided a fuckload when I wrote this before you as the director were ever needed in my life. Because we have the character saying, don't be angry, which clearly means that the writer is picturing the woman's companion as frustrated or angry in some way. And her line, we come all this way, in fact, I think sounds incredibly frustrated. So this will be the last thing I talk about before we move into the Q&A section. And Taylor and Rachel, I welcome you sticking around again. And Taylor, actually, I do want to say, Taylor, will you introduce yourself to the room?
Sure. Hi, I'm Taylor, she, her. I'm the casting director at New York Theater Workshop.
Yeah. So the reason, both because obviously everyone should know who just read, but Taylor is, I can say, one of the great casting directors. And I don't know if this is how you think about stuff, Taylor, but so I'm shifting back into just how I think about working on text specifically with casting, as well as then subsequent text analysis. And this goes to what undergirds my taste, is I told you that specificity equals it is the most it can be. And it, in this case, I'm going to say is the production that Rachel Chavkin would direct, period. And what I would say I'm driven by, and again, you have to figure this out for yourself, is how can I make this, typically I'm asking, how can I make this as painful as possible? And it's one of the things, like Amber Gray, who's, as many of you might know, is one of my closest collaborators. Amber often will like hit me in rehearsal because I will say something that is in fact intended to make a scene or a moment almost untenably hard to play, because I am interested in that heartbreak. So in thinking about how to cast Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, or any play, but I'm going to talk about this, I thought a lot about that first question that we were talking about of what is happening. So Light Shining in Buckinghamshire is a play that has a whole bunch of disjointed scenes. And in fact, Carol encourages you to not necessarily, there are some recurring characters in the scenes, and Carol says when we did it originally, and often I think it's helpful to not even cast consistently with one character from scene to scene to scene. Directorially, I actually did not obey that encouragement from Carol, and Carol is such an established writer, and this production was not the original production of her play, so I felt like I could, in good faith, disregard that encouragement from the writer, because I wanted to try to make it, I played in my head sort of the two different productions as best I could, one with people playing a character consistently throughout, and one with people switching. And to me, the first was the more powerful, and I wanted Carol's play to be as powerful as possible. So in this case, I didn't listen to the great Carol Churchill, but in service of the play as I could identify it. And at the end of the day, all you've got to go on is your taste and the rigor with which hopefully you have made every single choice. Back to this idea of making choices. So they originally did the play with just 6 actors, 4 women, and 4 male identifying and 2 female identifying. And that was what we did in our production. Was we had 4 male identifying actors and 2 female identifying actors, both of whom were in this scene. And Light Shining in Buckinghamshire is set in the lead up to the English, to a revolution in England, and ultimately the aftermath, the success of the revolution, ultimately the disappointing aftermath. And it is focused particularly on the movements of the diggers and the levelers and the ranters, who were these extraordinary extremist sects that kind of overlapped between religious ideology and political ideology. And what I would tell you, and what I in fact talked a lot about to many people at Near Theater Workshop and my whole team, is that for me, Light Shining in Buckinghamshire is a play about collective liberation. And so what I said to Taylor in thinking about how I wanted to cast it is that the cast, as well as certainly the design team, needed to be as reflective as we could be of the idea that we fall together and we rise together, and that collective liberation is based on casting as inclusively as possible. And for us, that certainly included racial diversity. That also included diversity of physical abilities and disabilities. And that also included age diversity. So in fact, very much for A Woman Leaves Her Baby, that was played by 2 actresses. The woman who had the baby was, I believe, a 25-year-old actress. And the woman who played her companion, the second woman, was a 95-year-old actress. And we had to think about, and I should say, these 2 women in theory are not 2 characters you ever meet anywhere else in the play. They are only in this scene. And in working on this, we talked extensively about whether the second woman, played by the 95-year-old actress, had children or not. We certainly knew that both women were from poverty because they have come to this house and this town, right? I'm looking at where my cursor is circling on the right side. It's a special house. It's a good town, right? These are women who don't live in a special house, and they don't come from a good town, and thus are making the choice, the devastating choice, that wealth is going to protect this child who the first woman cannot feed, right? We have the lines, "Another day she'll be dead," just following that. So the baby is on the brink of starvation, right? Above this, the second woman has said, "She die if you keep her. What you do then, you got no milk." The baby's so weak, she's not even crying. And we talked about how, what for us was really important is the idea that they were exhausted. And that maybe they had spent the last 2 days walking from their tiny village to a place where there was a town rich enough to have people with extra means that they might be able to take a baby. And so that for us, to this question of what is most emotional, if that is sort of the way I think about making choices, I tend to think about like an optometrist where they just like flip the glass and it's like, which one's clearer, A or B? And then they flip it again and it's A or B, which one's clearer? I do that all the time, and I genuinely am thinking, what hurts my heart more? And if it's a comedy, then I ask what makes it funnier. It's sort of the same thing. We could keep going, but I'm gonna stop talking for a moment and ask for questions. And Erin is going to help us. I'm gonna stop sharing. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Taylor. That was beautifully read. So any questions about any and all of it, hit us.
Great. So we have a number of questions that have already come in, and there's some themes that are emerging. But given that we just spent some time with scene work, I thought we would start with a question. How do you see scenes in rehearsal with new eyes or perspective when you've seen it over and over again?
Oh, it's such a good question. You know, sometimes you have to just put something away and come back to it the next day. And going back to that, I think it was number 4 in the list, time equals the number of choices you get to make. Time literally means how many different days you can look at a scene and restage it and try to think about, I'm always just like, what's wrong with this? Like, why isn't this working as good as it could? And so typically when I like actually working on Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, I would never rehearse a scene or any given moment more than 1.5 to 2 hours. And for a musical, that tends to be a little bit longer. I might spend 4 hours maximum on a given song or number, depending on how complicated it is, because at a certain point you just become jelly, right? I'm sure is familiar. And so, so I would just try to return to it the next day or 5 days later. And typically you're going to see something different.
Cool, thank you. There's a bunch of questions about collaboration, and if you have suggestions for collaboration with scenic and lighting designers, if you have, how do you collaborate with dramaturgs? How do you collaborate with writers who are in the room with you?
I'm laughing because collaboration was the bullet point that I was like, we're not going to get so much to that. Okay, so like, let's stop living in the world that the director is the only person. Just, you know, I do that because dogmatically, I think it helps to just try to isolate the craft for a moment. But obviously, I spend my life collaborating and I love my collaborators. I want to say at the outset, broadly, that I think a lot of, in particular, early career directors, I have found tend to think that collaboration equals either not having strong ideas or withholding those strong ideas and hoping that by asking smart leading questions, someone will figure out what you are thinking and arrive at that. And I personally think that is horrendous. I try to never ask a question that I already know the answer to. And that's true with my actors and that's true with my designers. I would never, ever start a design process by saying, so where do you think the play is set or the musical is set? I tend to actually always start a design process with the piece kind of sketched in my brain as to what this set looks like. And what that sketch really is like so laughably unspecific on a aesthetic level that it can barely be called a sketch. But it's a very strong impulse on A, how it needs to feel spiritually, and B, how I need it to function. So I definitely said to Ricardo, who's designing Lempicka and actually also designed Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, Ricardo, we have to move very fast. So I think the set is all on wheels. And I keep having this image of these studio lights because, of course, Tamara de Lempicka, the subject of Lempicka, is a painter. So and also the show begins and ends in Hollywood. And so I was thinking about movie lights, and I was thinking about the fact that she claims to have invented Art Deco, which, let's be real, Tamara de Lempicka did not exactly invent Art Deco, but she was very important to the development of the movement. But the point is, Tamara thought about her life in very grand terms. She forged her own narrative. So I was thinking about the language of movie sets. And I was like, oh, and that ties with the rolling furniture and this idea that a setting can manifest and go away very quickly. So like there's a whole scene on a train car. So like the train car should be realistic, but it's just as if we were filming it. So the train car is realistic, but it's not like you have a whole train. It's just that car. So I vomited all this to Ricardo initially. And then Ricardo goes and figures out what that like what he actually wants to see, what he likes looking at. So it has to go through all the lens of his taste. And so fundamentally, it's really important to work with people who, yes, are very good at their job, but equally whose taste you trust. And those are the people who I come back to again and again. It's not necessarily that it's my taste or that I could tell you what their favorite art movement is, but just have I ever seen them make something tacky or ugly? Or on the flip side, like I've seen, there's a young designer, Yushin Chen, who I've now seen like 5 different things that she's designed. Each is radically different, but I loved looking at each one. And so now I want to work with her because I trust her taste. And it's sort of the same with acting, is that fundamentally I don't need necessarily the most like smart actor or brilliant actor, but do I trust what comes out of them? And that's going to be the core of the collaboration. It's going to be me typically vomiting on them everything I know, whether that's day 1 of table work or the first design meeting, and then them taking that and running.
Thank you. There's this really leads into kind of another cluster of questions that's emerging, which is about how you shape process and start a process and allow for a process that has room for learning things and making changes. And sometimes, as you said, you have many years and lots of time, and sometimes you have very little time. And in those circumstances, how do you adjust your process work?
I love this question. It's so key because actually one of the main things I have to do as a director, particularly on new play development and new musical development, almost the #1 thing that any producer is looking to me for is to be the architect of the process, which is, and in fact, Aaron and I have had this exact conversation as producer or artist of the producing entity, New York Theater Workshop, and director, which is the producer saying, what do you need? Like, do you need a workshop? Do you need, is it, I had this call this morning about budget, and they were saying, can you get away with 4 weeks of rehearsal? Right? And what they are trusting is that as a director, and now a very experienced director, is I'm going to have a shortcut in my brain for knowing, okay, we have this many numbers to stage. I personally know that for a very complicated song that I know is going to have a lot of different, 50 different entrances and 20 costume changes over the course of this one number. I'm thinking about a very specific number in Lempicka that is very complicated. That is going to take, frankly, that number to get it really good is probably going to take 2.5 to 4 days of rehearsal, which I'm going to break up over the course of our 4-week rehearsal process. And I am going to constantly, over the course of that 4-week rehearsal process, have to reevaluate, do I have another afternoon that I can spend on this number? And the way that I'm going to fundamentally evaluate that question is how damaging, how much is what's happening in this number hurting the overall forest, right? So this goes to dear Brian Kulick's admonition to me when I was in grad school to think about the forest through the trees. A way to think about that is the process is the forest And each moment of stage time that you got to craft is a tree. And so I think about having to identify what I can do fast and what I can do slow, and what is going to have to be slow. 2-person scenes, I'll tell you, I would love to spend 5 days on them. Not going to do that in a musical. On Light Shining in Buckinghamshire, I spent hours on 2-person scenes because plays rehearse so much faster than musicals. I mean, I know I said plays are harder than musicals. Plays are harder artistically than musicals. Musicals are behemoths when it comes to the technical challenges of it. So they're just, different challenges. Yeah, so I will, before I start a rehearsal process, I will map out basically, particularly on a big musical, how I am spending. If it's a 4-week process, I'm gonna map out probably the first 3 weeks of it, if not 3.5 weeks of it, of when I'm going to do first draft of each number. And again, a 2-person scene in a musical, probably gonna get it maybe 2 hours. Maybe I'll give it 2 hours. Big ass song, gonna get 3 hours for the first draft, and then maybe another 4 hours for the second draft. And then we'll evaluate how much time there is and how much more time I can put to it. But it's very, very practical. I hope that answers that question. Yeah.
Cool. There's a number of questions too about how advice for people starting out.
I don't give advice. I can, I don't want to do it because you're all so different. So the only thing I would say is the only thing that is the difference between an artist and a non-artist is if you're creating art. So that's and make sure you have health insurance. That's really important.
Another question is, as a white director, how do you approach conscientiously directing and collaborating with racially diverse ensemble on a text that grapples with the issues of race?
Yeah. So first and foremost is to own how little you know, and including, I don't know the answer to that question. What I can say are the different things that I think about, and I love that you also said, how do you grapple with, because you're not presuming that there's an answer. First and foremost, I try to never put anyone in the position of being the only them in a room. And of course, the minute you begin to think about this, what is wonderful is the Venn diagram begins to overlap immediately, right? So I try to make sure that no one is the only queer identifying person in a room, but there can be overlap sometimes between or the Venn diagram of queer and African American, or queer and Latinx, or queer and white, right? So like the different marbles. So I try to be very conscientious about just no one ever having to speak for a group, because it's just not possible, and it's bullshit. So I try. So that is something I think about, and that goes to the design team, that goes to the rest of the, that goes to my assistant or associate director, that goes to stage management, which includes obviously the PAs. So that's one thing. It obviously goes to the writer. I would also say, at the outset, and I will say I have said different things depending on the play, is, although I'm trying to think actually if I've worked on anything recently where this has not been the case. What I primarily say is right at the outset on day one with the cast is to be clear that I am interested in them bringing their whole self as much as they wish to bring into the room. And what I am trying to signal in saying that, and I will then sometimes unpack this directly, is your points of reference. Right? Like going back to that Carol Churchill scene that we looked at. I said these women, right, we know from Carol's play is very concerned with poverty, with haves and have-nots, with poverty and wealth. But people's reference points for poverty are going to be very, very different depending on where they come from, i.e. poverty in, I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland. Poverty just in Silver Spring, Maryland, in Montgomery County, Maryland, is really different whether you came from a more rural part of the county or one of the more urban parts of the county, because the county was right on the border with Washington, D.C. So there were really high population density and low population density. And there's real major poverty in both areas of the county, but it looks really different. Poverty is going to look really different depending potentially on what your racial background is. Poverty is going to look really different depending on education level, right? So all of these reference points for what that means. And so if I am saying to a company, I am interested in your full self, then genuinely, I am both hopefully, both through that and then consistently re-raising it, empowering them to bring them their full self, which definitely don't fucking assume anyone's gonna do, particularly because white artists have not earned it most of the time. So why wouldn't your collaborators of color maybe walk in with some more defenses up? In terms of, yeah, that's clear. And then I need to want to use those reference points in the work, right? Like you have to, this goes back to the collaboration thing, is don't ask the question if you don't want the answer. And that I think is very, very key to a white artist working conscientiously with artists of color in particular, but any artist working with someone else just broadly. Don't ask the question if you aren't ready to receive the answer versus react to the answer. So those are all things that come up for me in response to grappling.
Thank you. There's a number of questions about if you have suggestions for things that people should be reading or seeing or engaging with, I think in this moment, and then also just more broadly.
Oh, in this moment, I don't know. I mean, even this moment is so different for everyone, right? So I'll just tell you, obviously, like these three plays, and we didn't get to read any of Young Jean's Lear, but it's truly one of my favorite plays of all time. So read that and read God's Year and read Carol Churchill's Light Shining in Buckinghamshire. But what I'll say are books that were seminal for me. Those Susan Laurie Parks plays were really seminal for me. Again, in terms of like thinking about plays that I like. I loved, what was it called? Certain Fragments, the book by Tim Etchells about forced entertainment, a very seminal devised theater company from Britain. I can't remember who wrote it, but a beautiful, extraordinary book on the Wooster Group that was very important to me, which had Kate Balk as, I think, Emperor Jones on the cover, and I can't remember. I apologize to writer and book. It's been a long time since I read it. I'm reading The Overstory right now, and I'm almost done with it, and it has my heart, which is a novel. And it's blowing my mind, and I would recommend everyone read that. Yeah, I don't know. For me, there is no end to consuming. I think that's actually one of your biggest jobs as a director, and certainly as an artist, but is to be expanding your palette so that you're not ever you're not ever limited by your own imagination. So I love reading. I've been watching a fuckload of movies. I just rewatched Dee Reese's Mudbound, which is one of my favorite films I've seen in the past number of years. Yeah.
Cool. And I want to thank everybody who has questions. We're going to wrap it up. We have one more. This is the one that has been the most upvoted. And you might have already started to just answer it, Rachel, which is, what do you do to stay proactive and creative when you have time between projects or when you might not have had a next project?
Sure. Hey, talk about this moment now. Yeah. I am. So right now, I'm in exactly that spot, right? As we all are, and I have an undeterminate timeline. I know I'm prepping for Olympika. I know I'm prepping for a feature film that I'm going to be working on. So I have been doing targeted research for both of those projects, but also just generally, I think it's my job to keep myself inspired. And so for me, that is, the way I do that is taking in as books or film, and good film, I mean, which can be really broad. And certainly my research has included some not good film, or like, yeah, I'll leave it there. I'll leave it that general, actually, but like kind of broad-minded. But I think it's only your fault if you're bored. I say very mercilessly. That might not be fair, particularly because probably a lot of us are quite bored these days. I certainly am running every day to keep myself from going mad. But that's kind of separate. Yeah, it's just like, I know, maybe some of you identify with this. I can tell you I am fueled by the fear that I am uninteresting, and that I have a small palette that is limited, and that I am not particularly smart. Those fears fuel me because I know so many deeply smart, creative thinkers. As the privilege of my life, because I spend a lot of time with monster artists, and non-artists, politicians. I just got to spend a day at the UN with a woman who she was on the Nobel Prize team that helped negotiate the new nuclear non-proliferation treaty. She's extraordinary. So those are my bars that I'm constantly thinking about. And it's why I intake, is it becomes a cycle of people who are inspiring, who I want to know all the things that they know. Yeah, so I would hate to label this time as a gift, because too many people are having too horrible a time or worse right now. But that is what I am doing with this time, is it's a concentrated period during which I can take in a lot, so that I'm full when the time next comes to have output.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity, for your time, for your insights. This has been such a beautiful 90 minutes. And I want to thank also Rachel and Taylor and Declan and Uno and a host of other people from the New York Theater Workshop team who have been working tirelessly over the last few weeks to bring programming, virtual programming to our entire New York Theater Workshop community. We are going to be back for Mondays for the foreseeable future with master classes. Next week we will be joined by Jeremy O'Harris. The following week by Celia Keenan-Bolger, a wonderful, Jeremy is a playwright and performer. Celia is a wonderful performer and activist. And we'll close out the month with Liliana Blaine Cruz and Adam Rigg, a director and designer, talking about imagining worlds.
These are such great. I want to come to all of them, Erin.
Come on back, please do. And we'll be joined on Wednesdays as well. We're going to do fireside chats. Our rehearsal room has a really beautiful fireplace where we like to gather and talk with artists. So we're going to have regular weekly chats as well. This week, Jim Nicola, our artistic director, is going to be talking with Penny Arcade, who is a downtown theater legend. Next week, I will be talking with Celine Song, who is the writer of Endlings, which is one of the plays that we had to cut short last month. The 22nd of April, we're going to have Martina Mayok, Rebecca Frecknell, Josiah Chase Owen, Charlene Cruz, and Austin Smith, the writer, director, and 3 actors from Sanctuary City, come and talk with us. And we're going to close out the month with Martha Redbone and Aaron Whitby, 2 wonderful composers and songwriters who are going to be chatting with Jim. As I said, this class, all of these talks are free for everybody in the community, longtime community members and brand new community members. There were almost 600 people tuning in at some point this afternoon. So we are so happy to be in community with you. If you are in the position to be able to support this work, $25, $10, $5, we are fortunate enough to have been in the position that we are able to keep our staff on, and we are able to compensate the artists who are joining us virtually in the world. So if you are in a position to support us, please let us know. If you are on Zoom, there'll be a survey link that comes when you click out of the thing. Please fill out the survey. We want to know what you think and how to continue this programming.
Fill it out and donate if you can. It feels, even as a young artist, I remember like making my first $5 donations, and it like set up a gene in my brain that when you could give more, you did, and when you can't, you give $1. And yeah, and there's no, I mean, New York Theater Workshop is home. It's home, so give it.
Phil, and if you're on Facebook, the link will be there as well. In case you're curious, Declan just posted in the chat the link to the team documentary that Rachel was talking about at the beginning of our time. And so, yeah, please stay well, be well. We look forward to seeing you and being with you virtually, and we look forward to being in community again when the opportunity arises. Have wonderful afternoons, and we look forward to seeing you back. Thank you again, Rachel.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you all for reading and for joining and listening. Thanks. Good luck.
Bye.